Delta Farmland and Wildlife Trust has been operating for over 30 years now in Delta and Richmond, partnering with many longstanding partners that are represented on this call. So we're grateful for those partnerships. And in 2023, with support from the Ministry of Agriculture, our stewardship programs expanded to Metro Vancouver and the Fraser Valley. So extending the reach quite significantly in terms of the number of farmers that we're able to participate with and support with the stewardship practices that they are implementing on farms. I'm Christine Schmaltz. I'm the Executive Director of the Delta Farmland and Wildlife Trust. And today on the call, we also have other members of our team. So we have our biologists that are out in the field on a regular basis, monitoring wildlife on these stewardship projects. So that's Connor and Patricia. They spend a great deal of their time in set-asides, monitoring raptors, bees, bats, and other birds. So they're the experts on that side of things. We also have, I believe, Valerie joining us today, who manages our office and our finances. Without further delay, I guess I will introduce April Stainsby. So April has been working for DFWT since 2023. She comes to us with a long-standing, sort of strong experience in soils and agronomy, and has been working on all sorts of really interesting projects with the trust since her time here. We also have Jack and Bill, so Jack Bates and Bill Zymans, who are farmers who have been participating in our projects and practices for a number of years, and they're here to share their experience with the trust and with the stewardship practices that they have implemented on their farms. So with that said, I'll turn it over to April and we'll get things going here.
Good morning, everyone. We're so happy you're here. Today we're going to talk about grassland set-asides. So what is a set-aside? Why would you grow one? A bit about how you would grow one. And this talk is going to be focused more on the agronomic side of things. But we do have Connor and Patricia here to help answer your more ecological and wildlife-focused questions at the end. So what is a grassland set-aside? So grassland set-asides promote incorporating perennial grassland and pollinator species into annual crop rotations. And how they work is a field would be taken out of crop production temporarily and seeded to a grass, legume, and form mixture, and then left to rest for 2 to 4 years, sometimes a bit longer, before being returned back into crop production. So this is done to let the soil rest and rebuild, and to support pollinators and provide crucial habitat for raptors and owls and grassland nesting birds during this period. So this practice doesn't work in every place and every farm, but it can be particularly useful in areas that used to be grasslands, like Delta, much of Delta, Richmond, and parts of the Sumas area and Abbotsford were formerly grasslands, and this type of habitat is becoming increasingly scarce. And so through this program, we are providing more of this kind of old field grassland habitat that's really crucial for many of the animals and also is helpful for improving soil quality. And so Delta Farmland and Wildlife Trust then provides cost share support for growers who are doing this practice. And so we have a grassland set-aside program to provide support for set-asides. And how this works is the grower would do all the field preparation and purchase the seed, etc., to plant a set-aside. And then Delta Farmland and Wildlife Trust provides a cost share support at a set rate per acre for all the acres that are set aside. And so around 400 to 600 acres have been in this program each year. I'm just going to check if I need to. Okay, now we're good. Each year in Delta and Richmond, and around 14,000 acres have been established in total since 1993. So this program has been around for more than a couple of decades now. And for 2026, the cost share rate is $500 per acre. And if fields are in good condition and have good cover, so they can be renewed each year, and the cost share payment would be provided each year. And this program is available to farmers throughout Metro Vancouver and the Fraser Valley. So how does the set-aside fit into your crop rotation? So they can fit into both annual and perennial crop rotations in different ways. So we often see set-asides in Delta in vegetable and potato fields. So how this works is fields that have been heavily used would be taken out of production temporarily and put into a set aside and then left to rest and rebuild the soil before returning back to cash crop production. This program can also be used for fields transitioning to certified organic production. So those fields could go into a set aside during the transition phase. And we do see this program used quite a bit on organic farms, not necessarily in the transitioning phase, but just to build the soil. Set-asides can also be used in perennial cropping systems. So particularly, we've worked with blueberry growers, and we have a separate program called the Blueberry Rest Program, which is essentially to support set-asides on blueberry farms specifically. And so in a perennial system, it works a bit differently. The set-aside would come in during the replant phase. So on a blueberry farm, how it would work is if you are removing blueberry bushes for whatever reason, then in the period before you replant with your next blueberries, we would provide support to grow a set aside. So this could last for at least 1 year, 1 to 3 years. And again, it's grown to cover the soil, improve the soil, and to provide habitat. And in this case, often particularly for pollinators. So as you can see in this picture, there's a set-aside field full of sunflowers right beside a blueberry field. So this can be particularly beneficial when adjacent to to a crop that requires pollination, like blueberries. And so the cost share payments during this time can allow growers to take more time to make decisions on what they want to replant the field with. And having income during this period can make this practice possible so that the field is able to rest and rebuild rather than feeling like it needs to be leased out or put into cash crop production. So now I would like to turn it over to Bill and Jack to introduce themselves. So first, Bill, if you don't mind, just quick introduction to you and your farm and a bit about your experience with set-asides. So maybe why you plant them and how long you've been growing set-asides.
Well, thank you, April and Christine, for allowing me to be a part of this. It's obviously a very exciting portion of agriculture, and the more we can get out into the world about this is important. So, as was said, I'm Bill Zalmans. I own and operate W&A Farms in Richmond and now lately in Delta as well. But I started using set-asides probably about 20 years ago as a rotation for my potato, vegetable, strawberry, and grass farm operation in Richmond primarily. And as I started streamlining some of my crops, I needed something to rotate with other than heavy um, challenges around the land. And so we incorporated the set aside program, and very quickly I came to realize that it really helped with building my soil back to where it needed to be. One of the practices I'd used up until then was we rotated our vegetables with clover seed, which my father grew for many years, and we really benefited. So when I got involved with the set aside, I thought, well, this could be a good relief valve, and it kind of helped offset some of the costs of the rental of the land, and it helped preserve the property and add some value to what we were doing. And I remember very vividly when people were coming out and checking these set asides from the Delta Trust, they said, wow, you could really tell the structure of your soil is healthy and very loose once you've incorporated that. And I've had a quick look through the presentation. And one of the things that I didn't see, and maybe for future to consider, is the fact that once you take all that grass mass and you incorporate that into your seed bed, wow, what a return on your investment. That first and in that first year, how it breaks down and adds fiber and vigor and ability to grow really lush crops. It only took me a couple of years to realize the importance of incorporating this kind of a program into my farm. Hope that answers a few of your questions, but I'll be open to more questions as we move through, April.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. That's really great. And Jack, if you don't mind giving a similar introduction, yeah, to yourself and why you grow set-asides.
Yeah, I'm Jack Bates. We farm in Delta here. I farm with my three brothers, Tecardi Farms. We've been growing set-asides from the start, and we've, it's, I think Bill covered it very well, but it's certainly, we took over some of the backup lands years ago when we bought some of them back, and they were pretty depleted, so that we put the set aside into quite a bit of it, as much as we could at the time, and we incorporated quite a bit of clover into it, and it was it takes a while, but it finally the ground does come around, and it over the long run it makes a huge difference on what you can grow, and the profitability of a crop. Um, and I'm a firm believer that clover should be in every mix, and some of it, like red clover or Alsac, or we've even used some of the Mediterranean clovers, Berseem, and some of those, and they seem to die out in the winter, so you don't have and they don't reseed themselves, so it's you fix a bunch of nitrogen to the soil for the next season, and it's a good thing. The other, being in the blueberry industry too, we've noted we've been trying to plant set-asides with pollinators in them to attract the pollinators later into the season, and give the natural pollinators and even the honeybees, if you have any around, for something to feed on, because after pollination there's very little in our landscape that actually feeds the bees. So I know we had a field day a few years ago, and we had sunflowers, and the whole place was just humming, and those bees are coming from somewhere. So the more natural pollinators you can support, I think in the long run, the better you'll have. It'll work out for your pollination and your fruit, and whatever else you're trying to pollinate.
Great. Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you. That was great. So we'll have Jack and Bill pop in, a few more times after this, and I'm going to talk about the benefits now. So why do you plant a set-aside? Well, one of the big reasons is the soil, to improve the soil, so letting the soil rest and rebuild after intensive annual cropping or cultivation. And here we have a picture. The darker soil here you can see is attached to some grass roots. So this was dug out of a set-aside. And you can see it has really nice aggregation, nice clumps there. Yeah, it looks really good. And then this clump was from a adjacent potato field. It's much more compacted. So this kind of illustrates the impact of that grasses can have, perennial grasses, on the soil. So yeah, having the set-asides usually grow big. There's a lot of thick grass cover, a lot of biomass. And so and it stays all year. So that's very helpful for covering the soil, protecting it from erosion, suppressing weeds, and reducing standing water in the fields. But having these perennial grasses growing for several years, and other clovers and other plants in there, can really help the soil quality. So it can help because they have these big root systems that can grow for several years. They have a lot more potential to improve the soil than an annual crop would. And so they can help with adding organic matter and carbon to the soil. And they can also, as you can see in this picture, help with improving soil structure. So forming nicer, more aggregation in the soil. And the better soil structure means reduced soil compaction and improved water infiltration and aeration, as well as space for plant roots to grow, and also supports the soil microbial community. And so we have partnered with UBC on several studies over the years, particularly on soils and GLSAs, or set-asides. And several of these studies found that there was improved aeration porosity and aggregate stability and bulk density in set-asides, so indicating that there was reduced compaction and improved soil structure after 2 years of set-aside, and improving as the set-asides age. Another big reason, and one that we've been increasingly focused on at the Trust, is supporting beneficial insects. So providing habitat for beneficial insects, particularly native pollinators, and providing floral resources provides food throughout the season, and then the undisturbed ground also provides nesting and overwintering sites for pollinators. And so here's a set-aside field which has a lot of sunflowers in it. And so the pollinator species, like sunflowers and Vaccilia, are included in a mix that's generally focused on perennial grasses, and usually some of the clovers that will live for a few years. So the annuals really come up and are really showy the first year. So here we see the sunflowers, which are really great for pollinators, and it's really nice that they They flower later in the year. But underneath, you can see there's all these clovers as well, which are really important because they'll actually come back for a number of years to support pollinators for a longer time. And so, yeah, we've been really encouraging including flowering species in set-asides where possible. And they can be particularly impactful where they are adjacent to crop fields that rely on pollinators. So especially by blueberry fields. This is another example of a pollinator set-aside. So this one's full of a plant called Phacelia, which has these beautiful purple flowers. And this plant really attracts pollinators. If you go into one of these fields, it'll just be buzzing. It's so loud. It's very cool to experience. And the Phacelia and sunflower are often planted in the same fields together, but they're annuals. They will tend to die out after the first year or two and be replaced by the grasses. So we've also worked with UBC on several studies on pollinators in set-asides. So I'm just going to mention one, which was by Carly McGregor. And this study was looking at the number of different pollinator species that were found in the traditional sort of grass-based set-asides compared to a pollinator set-aside, compared to an actively cropped field. And the results are in this Venn diagram here. But overall, they found that there were 39 pollinator species that were found only in set-asides, not in the crop field, and that especially the pollinator GLSA had 17 species that were only found in the pollinator GLSA, not in the traditional set-aside. So this just shows some, strong support for the practice from a pollinator perspective. Another important benefit, and one of the reasons that set-asides are really started initially, is habitat for raptors. So these fields form a really dense stand of grasses, and this provides a lot of habitat for small mammals, which then feed the raptors and owls and herons who use these fields quite a lot. And these fields are also really important for grassland nesting birds as they're undisturbed during their nesting season. And then other benefits, so having the cost share program in place to support having a set-aside can help growers to have a bit more time and flexibility when they're deciding on replanting plans for something like a blueberry crop. Having this income to support this practice also just allows it to be possible to have more habitat and to allow fields the time to rest and rebuild instead of feeling the need to get a cash crop off of them every year. So yeah, Jack and Bill, if you have any comments on benefits that you've observed on set-asides that you want to share?
Well, one of the first things that come to mind is when you show the set-asides with the beautiful pictures, whether it's the sunflowers or others. If you're into agritourism, it sure helps bring the people on board to see what's going on in agriculture. But when you go to the soil quality, it sure helps. And as I said earlier, it is a real benefit to what we're doing. And in those off years, you need something that's going to help offset your cost of your rental and inputs. And so it is something that it helps the soil, it helps the bottom line on the farm, and it incorporates the needs of, as you've already said, the pollinations and so it's a total network of benefiting to agriculture. I've had times where I've done the 2-year program, the 3-year program, and more importantly, the 4-year. And you can definitely see the difference in putting the different years into play. And it also plays a big part in different soils. In the muck soils, I find it's beneficial. In 2 years, I get a pretty good return, but it also is a lot wetter land. So you have a lot of drown out of certain crops. In the very heavy soils, it really shows a difference after having it in set-asides for 4 years. I'll turn over to Jack if he has some more things to add.
Thank you. Yeah, one of the things that I've seen, especially in the sunflowers, the first year when you see the sunflowers, is the wildlife used right through the winter. I've seen sunflower fields with not hundreds, but maybe thousands of little sparrows and different birds in the daytime feeding, and then I think I know for a fact that the ducks and snow geese come in the after dark. So we raise grow these crops for pollinators, but they also benefit the wildlife and the migratory birds later in the year when they've gone to seed, and all those seeds are eaten up by the birds that are around. Yeah, I think that's about it. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Yeah, that's really interesting what you're saying, Bill, about the different impacts on different soil types. That's what I was seeing in the UBC study too. There was one looking at soils that were not as productive and maybe had salinity problems. It took longer to see an improvement versus ones that were a bit better.
Correct.
So now we're gonna just talk about some sort of more practical information. How do you grow a set-aside? So just a couple main points here. So since they're a grass mix, usually they're seeded quite shallowly. So timing of seeding is really critical so that there's enough moisture for them to germinate and get established. So ideally in Delta, April or early May. They often get planted a bit later than that. Of course, if you have irrigation, it's more flexible. Fall seeding also could be potentially an interesting option. Where we normally work, it's usually not possible because of waterfowl and flooding in the winter. But in other regions, it could be a good option. Seeding rate, we usually see them seeded around 30 to 40 pounds an acre for grass and clover mix. And including a nurse crop is really important. We really encourage it because usually the mix is based around perennial grasses and they establish slowly the first year. So it's important to have something to fill in and help compete with weeds during that first season. So usually a nurse crop of either annual ryegrass or oats or barley is included in the mix. And then it's just important that the nurse crop isn't seeded too heavy so that it doesn't choke out the grasses growing underneath it. The pollinators or the annual pollinator species can also be included as a nurse crop, which is kind of neat because they grow rapidly that first year and provide quite a bit of cover. The nurse crop can be taken off, can be harvested as hay or silage later on in the summer if needed to give more space to the perennials growing underneath. For managing weeds, in the first year, if there's a lot of weeds on the field, this can be done by mowing at the right time when it will kill off those weeds and give more space to the plants growing underneath. But with mowing, because one of our big focuses in these set-asides is the habitat for grassland birds, it's really important to not mow before July 15th. In the first year, if needed for weed control, it could be okay, but in subsequent years, it's really important to not mow early in the season to protect the birds. And then another consideration is planning how you want to return to cash crop production at the end, because there can be quite a bit of biomass produced in the set-asides. And so once you till it in, it may need a bit of time to break down. So just planning ahead on timing of when you want to till it in and when you are expecting to be able to plant your next crop. Bill and Jack, do you have any comments or tips?
Yeah, this is probably one of your most important slides as far as I'm concerned, because different regions and different soil types really play a different role in how this establishes. So over the years that I've been doing this, I definitely want to work with a nurse crop. The benefit of taking that nurse crop off and then I spread the straw back out across the greenery underneath, which helps preserve that from the wildlife taking away. We've had problems doing it in the fall in different soil types, so too much water, that kind of stuff is sometimes a bit of a challenge. And in the next year of taking a grass or a silage crop off after July the 15th, I feel it really helps establish and give the grasses the ability to branch out and flourish. And I'm a firm believer in clover. It's probably one of the only things in that grass world, and I hated it when my dad grew clover seed of the dust, but it really helps build the soil quickly with all the fibering in the soil. The other thing that we have done over the years that's really helped with our seed bed is in enrichment, I've been able to do it, not so much here in Delta, but go in late in the fall and plow the greenery down, knowing that the next year I'm going to harvest or plant a potato crop or something. And I can go in just before Christmas and do a very shallow plowing, and helps to rotate into the soil and give it some extra time to break down because there's so much mass. And then in the spring, come back. I know it's not a really a strong practice, but boy, has it been beneficial to us.
Thank you. Yeah. Jack, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, it's much the same as Bill. Like, if you get seeding early, you can get a good catch of your set aside or your grass and clover mix in early. But if you happen to get a late spring, it's best to plant it with some sort of nurse crop. And the last few years we've been basically planting pollinators with it, which the benefit there is we've already talked about that. Um, the if you get a late year too, or any year, I think one of the mistakes I think some people make is working their ground too fine. You don't really need that. If you powder it right down, it's just going to pack down and seal over, and then you're back to square one. I think you just want to work it the same as you're going to plant peas or corn or potatoes. You don't have to work it as deep as potatoes, but you don't want to work it right down to powder. Um, it's it's not beneficial to you. It'll just seal up again. And as far as managing the weeds, if you get it planted early and just a grass crop, I don't think it doesn't hurt to mow it once or maybe a couple of times to let that. And I think if you do mow it and they knock some of the grass or clover back, it adds vigor to the plant and it'll come back with a vengeance. So it's if you take the top off a weed, it sort of stunts it and lets the grasses get ahead of them.
Great. Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting talking about mowing with another grower too who puts in the Phacelia and sunflower a lot. He was just saying it was really important to just think about like with a sunflower, if you mow it, you'll kill it. But something like and it won't flower, but something like the clovers and the Phacelia, they'll still come back if you mow it. So just thinking about how weedy your field is before you decide what to plant, I guess. And now we're going to talk about options for what to plant. So we don't prescribe what's planted in the fields. You can come up with your own mix, but we have some suggestions here. Like Bill was saying, it's really important to consider your field and yeah, just the specific requirements of your field. For example, if it floods or if it has salinity issues. But generally the set-asides need to have perennials in them because the intention is that they last for a couple years. So usually they're based around a mix of perennial grasses, which are slower establishing, and then also usually a couple clovers. So we have like red clover and Alsik clover are often used because they'll come back for a few years. And then some annuals are often included as well. So as a nurse crop, like we talked about, it could be annual ryegrass or oats or barley, but also Phacelia and sunflower are often included as flowers. And different clovers and even brassicas have been included in different mixes. We have two example mixes here. One is a pollinator mix that has been used quite a bit in Delta. This has the saltlander wheatgrass in it, which is supposed to be more salt tolerant. And then we also have the Grassland Set-Aside mix here, which was developed by the Trust quite a long time ago. And this was developed really with wildlife goals in mind. But yeah, it's very flexible in terms of what species you want to include. And I know Bill and Jack, you both mentioned clovers. Is there anything else you want to add about species mixes?
No, it really depends on where you are located and your soil types and floods. As clover is great, and I love it, and it really builds and it really helps. But if you're in an area, and Jack alluded to it, if it floods, it's gone in a year. But in my history, it's been one of the most beneficial ones. The different Timothys and a lot of it is based on your soil. Where are you? Because the set aside mix, and I've used it for quite a few years, the way it's been prescribed. And then I've doctored it up how I feel it was more necessary to certain fields and certain soil types.
Yeah. Thank you. And Jack, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, it's first of all, you got to growers have to get their head around this is another crop. So I would be soil testing and doing a pH test on the on your on the soil, and maybe to make this thing work, you need to get some lime on it, and in long term, lime will help your crops down the road too. So if you've got a real low pH, you're not going to be able to grow a lot of clover's not going to last more than a year, or might not even might not even show up. So the if you get your pH up around 6 or the high fives, it's going to make a big difference on the success of your set aside. And if you do have wet ground, I think LSAC clover is the best because it'll actually reseed itself and it'll come back the next year. And maybe some of the growers in the valley that maybe water's a bit of an issue, maybe they could be, and I don't see it on the list here, but maybe they could throw a bit of alfalfa into the mix too, because it's very deep rooted and it'll go to the water. Um, I know a few years, like way back 30 years ago, we tried some alfalfa here in Delta. And when we went to plow that field, the roots were coming up in the plow. It was hell to work up. The roots were, some of them were 6 and 8 feet long. They'd gone down to the subsoil to get water on a dry year. So it was to look at what was coming up when we were turning that over was just amazing. So that's maybe an option for people in the valley where you do have dry and there is moisture down lower. It wouldn't hurt to, and alfalfa will fix nitrogen too.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, that's a curious one.
Actually, and if I may, Jack alluded to a real important part here. You do have to consider it as another crop. That's one thing people, it's just not an in-betweener. And over the years, I've done the same as you do the soil testing, but it is the time that you can add the lime if you're coming back with a potato crop that you're worried about scabs and stuff. That's the time to put it on. And by the time you go back to a cash crop, it's well established and has helped your pH. Those are really two real key messages, and thanks, Jack, because those are a key. Test your soils, add your lime when you need it. Historically, my ancestors always said you can't farm without cows. This is a replacement in a sense that the cows aren't there. So, but hugely important to consider it as an actual crop for your farm.
Thank you. Very interesting. Yeah. Yeah, it's like, and it kind of replaces a pasture in
Correct.
rotation. Yeah, interesting. So now I'm just going to talk about a couple of trade-offs and challenges with set-asides. So one being, which we've talked a bit about, weed management. So just want to, when you're selecting your species, make sure you're not including anything that might become a future weed problem if it goes to seed. And like we talked about, having a nurse crop can help with reducing weed problems, preventing them, and weeds can be controlled by mowing at the appropriate times. Sometimes set-asides don't grow or establish well. This could often be because they're seeded too late and it's too dry, so they just didn't get established. If this happens, we would usually work with you to see if what can be done to improve it, things like reseeding or adding nutrients, checking for salinity or other issues in the soil. And for pests, so having grass growing for a number of years can increase wireworm population, so that's a potential risk to consider, especially considering or thinking about your control options that you have and what crops you plant after. So yeah, if you don't mind, again, Jack and Bill, if you have any comments on trade-offs and challenges you've experienced with set-asides, and maybe you could also comment on the cost to grow a set-aside, maybe per acre.
I'll let Jack go first on this one.
Okay.
So on the pest problem, of course, wireworms are an issue, but they're an issue if you just grow hay or pasture or whatever too. It's not just connected to the set aside. And wireworms aren't just a problem in BC or in the lower mainland. They're a problem across the country. And even in a place like PEI, wireworms, they have a bigger problem there than we do. And it's not about what we grow, it's about our federal government has taken away just about every control product we have for wireworms. So they've really taken away our toolbox how to control them. And if you have to treat wireworms, if you did it once every 7 or 8 years, that's all you need to knock the population back. And it's and I just forget how many different kinds of click beetle there are, but I think in PEI they have every one that's available. And they have I want to say 10 or 12. Bill would know better than I would, but it's a huge problem there, and they're strictly a potato growing area, or mostly potatoes. So they do affect other crops. They'll eat the roots off corn and stuff, and they'll affect strawberries and everything else. But you really see it in potatoes because it bores right into the potato, and it's a cull when you and if you have bad wireworms, there's every potato is affected. Um, what was the next question, April?
Oh,
The cost,
yeah.
cost.
Just challenges, trade-offs, and then if you have any comments on the cost of growing a set-aside. Yeah.
The cost of growing a set-aside?
Like to seed or just cost per acre
Well,
approximately.
I think everybody has to do their own due diligence and figure out what they want, what their seed, what they want to do and how they want to do it. I think at the end of the day, it probably at the $500 an acre, if you own your land, it's a little different. But if you're renting land and you got to pay the rent on that, you're probably going backwards a little bit. But I know at the end of 2 or 3 years or 4 years, if you put a cash crop in, you're going to get a bumper crop. And the other thing we haven't talked about is whether the more fiber and is in the soil. If you have a dry year, it holds the moisture. You don't need to irrigate as much or irrigate at all. The nutrients are available to the plant, and it's like night and day. So regardless of the crop, you look at the long term or the cost of it. You look at the long term, and if you looked at it over, say, you took an 8 year, since set aside for 3 years or 4 years, and then you cropped it for 4 years, I think you'd probably come ahead, because if you get so many ton to the acre and break even is whatever, and you got 4 or 5 ton more to the acre, that's your profit. So it's not just on the looking at the specific year or 2 years. You got to look at the overall productivity of your soil over a number of years. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and just to go into a little more what Jack has said, the wireworm component, that is one of the biggest challenges, and in the mix, and I see it in the chat. There's a question around it there. The clover and alfalfa, yeah, they kind of enhance the wireworm. So in places like PEI, as Jack has alluded to, set-asides are not really part of their forte. They try to keep their fields as dark and bare as possible to less enhance the ability for wireworm to build up population. And even ourselves here, I mean, it's a trade-off. You got to be prepared to lose some crops. So you have to make as management decisions what's best for your soil. As we've always alluded to, every farm is different. When you go around the nurse crops, we've talked about it. Again, you can give guidance, but it works differently for different farmers. I've used oats for many years when I had the ability to sell oats, grade lots of straw, which helped the nurse crops. Later on, moved to barley as that nurse crop became more better return on my investment. But all these things come into play. And an overall management, and I alluded to it earlier, in some cases, 2 years is okay, but 3 years is better, and 4 years really is helpful. But you have to take into consideration what are the crops you're going to grow right after those 4 years or 3 years. If you're going to grow a potato crop, I found the 3 year rotation, and in my seed business, I can't grow twice the same product. So go to a potato, then go to a vegetable or a corn crop. something that'll give you another year in there. So it really plays into what each farm is designed to do and how it works for them. But of all the challenges of this whole program, I think the wireworm is probably the biggest negative that comes into play. But one has to figure out where it works. When I look at my mixes, when I know I have a wireworm problem, I'll avoid the clovers a little bit and do a little more grasses that are not as beneficial to the population growth in wireworm. So again, everyone has to make some serious business decisions on their own to know their soils and know what they're doing and how this can work into your program. But at the end of the day, it really offsets your costs in an off year that you want to give the land a rest. And some of us have learned this the hard way over the years that they've been mining the soils to nothing, and we need to rebuild. And this program has been strongly designed in Delta for that purpose in mind, and we're seeing the results. And so, industry across the Fraser Valley and Lower Mainland in general can see the real benefit if you give it a chance.
Thank you. Yeah. And that makes me think that one of the farmers I talked to about when preparing this presentation, an organic farmer who grows set-asides, he was saying that he would typically not grow potatoes for the first couple years after a set-aside, just to give it a bit of time for the wireworms to reduce. So I'm just going to briefly go over some of the program guidelines with the Delta Farm and Wildlife Trust. So the seeding deadline for our program to be eligible for funding is June 15th, but we encourage seeding to be quite earlier than that. The not mowing before July 15th is really important to minimize impact on breeding birds. The one cut of hay can be taken per year after July 15th, but this will reduce the cost share rate. Otherwise, no harvesting or grazing is permitted within the program. And so now I'm just going to finish by talking about some of the monitoring that Delta Farmland and Wildlife Trust has done on the set-asides over the years. So we are really interested in what the impact of these set-asides is, and we've been monitoring them for many different things over the years. So something like they're often used, like Bill was saying, for soils that have been degraded over time that have been really heavily used to help rebuild them. So we have been for the last 3 years implementing a soil health monitoring program. So we have been sampling fields in their first year going into a set-aside, and then we plan to sample them again on the year that they leave the set-aside program. So far we've collected baseline data from fields coming into the program. And so it's sort of looking at some soil health metrics focused around really soil structure and water movement in the soil. We also monitor many of the set-aside fields every year throughout the winter for their use by raptors and herons and owls. And so we found over the years that the raptors do spend quite a bit more time in grassland set-asides than in annual crop fields, and that species diversity is higher in these fields. They do really seem to be supporting these species. And this beautiful picture is by Patricia. We also monitor the grassland set-asides for use by spring breeding birds. And so many fields or several fields are monitored each spring, and results have shown that these areas supported at least 47 species for migrating, foraging, and breeding birds. And some of the most frequently seen are listed here. And barn swallows have been found to regularly visit these set-asides. More recently, we have been really interested in how these habitats might support bees and bats, especially with this new focus on pollinator set-asides. And so we have started a monitoring program to look at different types of bumblebees in set-asides. And so Patricia has been doing this and has identified 4 species on average during individual field visits on a set-aside field of bumblebees. And we've also been doing bat surveys, which are use audio monitors to detect presence and different species of bats. And so set-asides have, on average, we've detected 4 species of bats on fields. And so, yeah, results from this monitoring indicates that these habitats are being regularly utilized by bats, and especially by 3 bat species of concern. And we are fortunate to have Connor and Patricia here today to take any of your questions you have about these wildlife surveys. So with that, I want to acknowledge our sponsors and funders. There's many organizations that provide funding and support the Grassland Set-Aside program and enable us to just provide this program for growers in the region. And I also want to acknowledge that the webinar today was supported by Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada through the Agriculture Climate Solutions On-Farm Climate Action Fund. And I want to thank you all for attending. It's great to have you here. Our contact info is here, our email and phone number. So please reach out with any questions. We're happy to chat. The program can be quite nuanced. So yeah, we're really happy to talk with you about how it might work for you. And our website is deltafarmland.ca. And on our website, you can find detailed information about our program, how it works in our brochure, and also you can find application forms to apply for the set-aside program.